Hey, Coach. So glad you found the video. Couple things. First of all, make sure you subscribe and like. Second thing, go over and check out teachhoops.com for coaches who want to get better. Let me show you how to put a roadmap and become a nationally ranked coach. I've done it for 30 plus years. Let me help you do that over at teachhoops.com. Let's head off to the video.
Coaches, welcome to another episode of Coaching Youth Hoops. I am your coach and host, Bill Flitter. Today we have a familiar face, Dr. David. He's back for another episode. Today we're going to be talking about conflict resolution. Before Dave jumps in, I just want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Game Changer. Coaches, go check out Game Changer at gc.com/coaching youth hoops. It's the one tool that I use for all my youth teams and clubs to help me manage the team, manage the video, gain stats, and a whole lot more. Again, gc.com/coaching youth hoops. On to the show. David, how are you? Welcome back. I think we discussed this is your fifth time. You are officially our longest term guest on the show. Welcome.
Well, it's great to see you again, Bill, and glad to be back.
Awesome. Glad to have you. I mean, I think this, you always discuss a much needed topic that's maybe not always X's and O's. And it's something that coaches always run into, which is conflict resolution and dealing with conflicts and how to solve those conflicts, right? Either with parents, maybe even with other assistant coaches, players, maybe even referees. I guess we didn't discuss that one, right? So there's lots of conflict when you're coaching. So oh, and congrats. Do a shout out. You're now officially an author. Congrats on that,
Yes,
Rick.
had
Yes.
a recent chapter come out. You can find that on my website, successence.net. But yeah, I'm on the cover with Tony Robbins. So it was kind of a nice opportunity to write a short chapter on how to use our biology for us instead of against us, a concept I call neural leverage. So it's a short read, and I'm getting it approved by the FDA as a non-drug cure for insomnia. So it'll put you to sleep in 15 minutes.
I'm sure it's more exciting than that. I'm looking forward to getting my copy.
Great.
Well, let's talk about conflict resolution. I'm gonna just let you talk. You guide us on this journey, and I'll just jump in with questions. I got a ton of them, I think. So,
Yeah. Well, conflict resolution, it's a topic that a lot of coaches don't want to deal with
yeah.
because we just want everything to run smoothly. But if there's two or more people, there's going to be some conflict at some point. It's just a matter of how intense it is. So, I always tell, my little kids that, what's this notion of conflict resolution? It's really about being kind to each other, even when someone
Hmm.
else gets you mad.
Yeah.
um, and starting there, and in any sports environments, hopefully our athletes are experiencing some emotions, but they should channel those in a positive way. And conflict comes about when they're not channeled appropriately, and things get out of hand.
Yeah, well, and what came to mind when you first mentioned that too was uh player to player conflict. So that's probably the one we kind of dive into that one where I can't tell you how many times, this player X on the other team is doing, Y to me, or they're pushing me, or they're scratching me, or they're just a bully on the court. Uh, that one is a little bit harder to deal with because one, you don't know them, and you're playing against them for 40 minutes, and it's the heat of the battle, and you're even the youngest ones, right, they're either gonna, you know, get in their face, they're gonna go off and cry about it, or get upset and cry, or they're gonna come to you and your best way to handle that conflict maybe is talking to the ref, at least to to start that process. As of course, as things escalate, then you can take that further. But uh, what tools would you give players in that particular case if it's again, player on the other team, they're just being they're not being nice. Let's just put it that way. Right?
Yeah, it's a common scenario. So, it's a multi-pronged approach. So the first
Hmm.
thing I would say is always take the high road. If someone is talking smack to you or bullying
Hmm.
you, it means that you're probably getting in their head. So don't stoop to their level and kind of waste your energy, waste your brain power on going down that hole because that's a competitive advantage in some respects. If their
Hmm.
focus is on you and not necessarily executing the game, to me that's an advantage. So how do we take it? How do we exploit that and take advantage of it? So we do that by keeping our calm, keeping our cool, and showing up for our teammates. So to me, it's a frame of reference. Am I focused on that person or am I focused on myself and my team and what we're doing right? Now, that's hard for adults to do. So to have kids do that, it's a little more difficult. So there's
Yeah.
simpler approaches. The simple approach is, all right, just take a deep breath. I used to crack jokes all the time. That would really
Mhm.
fluster people. So they go negative. I try to go funny or positive. So there's little things you can do like that. And then if things continue to escalate, then if things get physical, obviously you hope the ref would step in. But you and I
Yeah.
both know they're not always Johnny on the spot to do that. And then I tell coaches sometimes use a timeout if you see a child getting frustrated.
Mhm.
Um, So I know as a referee, I have stopped the game, even if for the little fifth graders, if a kid was losing and using it as a coachable moment.
Mhm.
I had one young lady throw a ball at her own teammate because play wasn't run. So I just stopped it there, a good coach moment, and had her escorted off to her parents and let her calm down for about 10 minutes and she made it back. So those are just some simple tools.
Not that
Um,
any of us ever thought about doing that too, ever.
no, no. But how can how can you
Yeah.
as a young athlete always be kind even if other people aren't? And I always tell them that, you're a better person, you're a better athlete if you ignore it because you're focusing on the game, you're focusing on building great team cohesion, and then you're role modeling how everybody else should act.
Well, and I'm going to take that a step further too, because one of the things that as a coach, and I have definitely have done this, and I'm replaying all of these scenarios in my head as you're talking of potential problems that didn't escalate from a player to player standpoint. And we we've created this culture with my club team that it's about next play. We always say next play. You've heard me talk about red dot and all of that before, and we put a red dot on our between our finger or between our pointer finger and our thumb, and I always yell out next play, next play. Either that's a mistake response or if I see a situation where it's escalating. And I'm so happy to hear because I always think, am I handling the situation right when they come off the court and I see that, they tell me, oh, this person is really irritating me. And I just say, well, that means, basically you're in their head and they're just trying to get you to bug you. And they've gotten to the point, especially my older girls teams, is they now just laugh at it. They
Yeah.
just like, oh, can you believe it? She's doing this, and it's like, and it's like, now I know I got her. That type of language when they come off the court. Um, but you're absolutely right. It's hard. Kids don't understand, right? So we have to be there to help them with some of these tools that you've mentioned. Let's talk about the situation where it's coach to coach. So coach the opposing coach, right? They're doing something, they're, they're not playing by your rule book, so to speak, and what you would do, right, in a game situation. And you're looking at them down, down the side, and you're giving them eye rolls. You might be saying stuff out loud. Now you're not maybe not confronting them at that point, but you have to deal with. You got to stop yourself and deal with that. But anyway, I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on that particular situation.
Yeah, for coach to coach, it's really about a couple key thoughts. How do I model conflict resolution?
Hmm.
So, I should lead by example for my athletes. So if I'm taking the bait from an opposing coach or someone in the stands, what does that say to them? That gives them permission to do it as well. So setting that positive tone and being the role model is key, which ties into my second point. The way to diffuse conflict resolution is one of the foundational elements is to create a safe environment for your team. So you gave the example of them turning it into we kind of laugh at it. I remember a team, they said, oh, this would be great in a Saturday Night Live skit if they were doing this. And then
Yeah,
it turned them kind of into clowns and it diffuses their emotions a little bit when we can deflect on, oh, they're the silly ones. And that safe environment then uh, uh, um, gives us this moment where, all right, I know we get fired up at times, but we have the habit, we have the culture where we have this environment where, yeah, we can feel frustrated, but we can approach it just in our team huddle.
that's right.
We can
Yeah.
approach it in a way where, I may be at my worst, but I feel comfortable expressing that, perhaps in the halftime locker room, but not on the court. And I'm not going to get fear of retaliation from others. So coaches are really there. And then also, as coaches, the third point I'll make is that we're supposed to be teaching communication skills. When those moments start coming up and things might potentially get chippy, I want to turn my focus on my team and demonstrate good communication skills where I can block out noise. Because if I expect them to have this next play attitude and be in the moment, I have to model the way in terms of how I communicate. So that's where I may double down
Mm,
on calming my athletes down or next play attitude or does everybody got to play, talk to each other. So
yeah.
those are just a few initial thoughts.
So I'm not perfect, but so we have this kind of joke on the team too about, if the kids and certain kids do it better than others, uh, but they'll actually, if they see me getting a little hot, if you will,
Yeah.
and I'm sitting down, they'll either, if I'm standing up, it's really interesting because I just think it's so cool. They'll just come up and say something to me. They'll say next play,
Yeah.
right? And hey, coach, remember next play. And I just think that is so cool. Or they'll actually put their hand on my leg if I'm sitting down, on my knee, and just say,
Oh,
coach, next play.
yeah.
And it's always done in such a way that it's like, okay, they're absolutely right. It's
Yeah.
it's next play. Just calm down. You can't, that situation is not in your control. So, just next play. And that comes from, again, establishing that culture and having that as a framework, because it's competition, so it is going to get a little angsty once in a while.
So
Let's Yeah, go ahead.
what I love about that on a couple levels is the culture that's set,
Hmm.
and everybody's reinforcing positive behavior. So just those
That's
little
right.
gestures are important, and that's that culture. And the athletes showing off their ability to implement a simple conflict resolution strategy. So how do we quickly de-escalate those emotions? How do I get it from
Yeah.
8, 9, 10 back down to perhaps a manageable 4 or 5? And it's the simple things. It's not rocket science. So, just a pat on
Yeah.
the shoulder or take a deep breath. Those things can defuse our emotions and get them at the optimal level quickly.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And I would think also player support, uh, again, going back to if you see one of your players, and it can happen at the younger level too. It doesn't, one of your players getting a little heated, we should teach them how to walk over and say, again, we always say next play, right? But whatever that trigger is for you to say, okay, let's just move on from the situation.
Yeah. And then as coaches, you have to get creative as well. So, a few times
Mhm.
I say, don't forget your mom's in the third row of the stands.
But she's the one yelling at me, coach.
Oh
It's a
man,
great segue, right? Or yelling
that's
at
a
the other
different
parents.
strategy,
Yeah,
but yeah.
yeah,
So have a variety of ways to calm and de-escalate people in their eye on the prize.
yeah. Well, that's a great. It is a great segue. Then let's talk about that player or the parent conflict.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I hear a lot from our parents who are in the stands saying, "I can't believe, I can't believe the way they're talking or yelling or." A couple times I've heard too, like my parents might have said something to the other team's parents, like they're third grade. Like, let's let's put this in reality. And then the other parents get all, you know, excited and start yelling at them. And it's just this like, okay, so how do what is the message to parents in that particular situation? So they're in the stands and there's conflict happening in the stands. Is that any different than anything else you talked about, or even parent to coach resolutions? So maybe we'll just kind of put that all in one
Yeah,
big bucket.
an approach coaches could take is to have the parents kind of sign a code of conduct or come up with something more positive. But we're building leaders out of these players, and we want a positive culture. So have an agreement with the parents as well.
Hmm.
So they have expectations. We have to coach the parents just sometimes as well. Because unfortunately, a lot of them are trying to relive their glory years. Everybody thinks that their child is going to be the one that's going to be in the NBA, against all the statistics otherwise. So bringing the joy in. I'm coaching little soccer, U10 soccer right now, and
Hmm.
I had 3 rules or 4 rules. I said safety is number one, smiles are number two, skills are number three, and snacks are number four. And
Yeah.
if we don't hit those four, you can come talk to me. But
Yeah.
everything should be positive. So trying to simplify it and saying this in front of the parents and the coaches, the players and the parents is equally important. So I find that initially a parents meeting is important. And then I always find a champion as well, because the vast majority
Mm.
of parents are great.
Right.
Uh, and some of them are natural at using those same tactics we talked about, diffusing it with humor, or just going over and say, "Hey, don't forget they're only 9 years old."
Yeah.
Um, and I like others to kind of step in as well. And then afterwards, if an opportunity presents itself, I'll go talk to the parent after the game and say, "Hey, I really appreciate your enthusiasm, but maybe we could redirect it in a more positive way." So that's how I would approach that particular scenario.
And the what do I want to call this? The sometimes dreaded car ride home. Right. So, most of our audience right now, are parents or coaches. We don't get this, this is not addressing the players side of things, but can you put, can you help our listeners put themselves in the shoes of what is happening with a child when they're talking about the post-game wrap up, so to speak, right? On that dreaded car ride home after a loss, after maybe a performance issue, right?
Mm. So I think every parent should use one of these two phrases to start a conversation in the car ride. The first thing they should say is, "I really enjoyed watching you play tonight." And just let it simmer. And
Hmm.
the second thing they should ask is, "Where do you want to go for ice cream?" And you should not say anything before those two questions, just some variants of that. And
Yeah.
then don't be judgmental, but listen. This is a great opportunity for parents to, it was a child out there experiencing this. So they're training hard, they're practicing hard, they might be managing a job, they might be, should be balancing school. So they have a lot on their plate. And then
Hmm.
maybe things didn't go their way. So games are a training ground. It's a learning ground for them. So we should approach it in that way. But unfortunately, way too many parents go after the stats. You're 6 points under your average, or, why didn't you get that steal? You weren't hustling. So that's in the mind of the child, whether there's, third grade all the way up to college, it's the same thought. Like, I'm already hard on myself. I'm my worst critic. And now my parents are loading it on even more. And what you're doing is they're putting up their defenses and they're not really listening. And then I probably bet my bottom dollar that some argument is going to ensue in the car ride.
Right.
If there's not an argument, the other half will just go silent, radio silent. um, so be open and not judgmental. Be curious and not judgmental as a
That's
parent.
good advice. What are some of the ways we make mistakes in conflict resolution? Common mistakes?
Yeah. Conflict resolution. I mean, what's the quote? Ben Franklin had a quote: "Never ruin an apology with a good excuse."
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So I think that one of the biggest mistakes in conflict resolution is we just don't stop at the sorry, but rather than we try to rationalize and excuse, and then other
Mm,
people, and it's a cycle of, well, now I have to defend my ego, I have to defend my actions. So back to that creating a safe environment where,
mm,
yeah, everybody screws up. I like my passionate athletes. And it's my job to perhaps corral them in a positive direction as opposed to a negative way. So that's the first thing, is not just parking on the I'm sorry. I got this next time. The next thing is assuming that our athletes have the repertoire of conflict resolution tools. They're still kids, they're growing. Experts tell
I
us
would
that.
add adults to that as well, not just the kids. Yeah, I'm guilty.
Neuroscientists, they tell us, neuroscientists say that the human brain still is developing in the mid to late 20s, maybe up to 30s. So that prefrontal cortex, so the ability to make good decisions.
Or 50s.
So, right. So the idea is, go Sesame Street level on them and say, all right, take a breath. Think of something funny. Think of something you're grateful for. Tony Robbins always says you can't be angry and grateful at the same time.
Mm,
It's
mhm.
impossible. So if they're angry, how do I flip them into, something where they're grateful, where they can smile, and then build that into your routine as a coach, or as a parent. So I know parents who a lot of times will tell a story about when they screwed up
Mm.
in a game, and that kind of diffuses the situation that we're all human, or point out the three great things they did. So those are some tactics to for anybody for conflict resolution, is to focus on the good first and what's the commonality, and then I guess an overarching principle I always try to have people use is always use the most generous form of feedback you can to
Mm.
start with. And then if it has to go up, but think of a staircase method. So maybe a smile and a pat on the back to start with. Yeah, you'll get them next time. Or, boy, I appreciate your hustle, even though they threw the ball out of bounds. And then let them diffuse. And that's the second mistake I think people always make, is they assume that as soon as a coach or a parent gives feedback and the solution to the conflict, that it's automatic. That's not the way our physiology works.
Mm.
We have to calm down. We have to process. So allow, the steam to go out a little bit. Allow them half the time out. Allow them the first 5 minutes of the car ride. That's just how we as humans were made. So to me, that's a big mistake.
No, that's good. That's good advice. In that particular case, though, this is probably not what you're saying, but if you and I have a conflict and we're well aware of that conflict, and you being the educated one and handling that conflict, you kind of just make a joke, right, to diffuse the situation. But is that just pushing aside the conflict and delaying the conversation that we really need to have.
Yeah, great point. So that, I mean, that's not a one size fits all solution, and everyone is
Yeah.
different. So some people respond well, some won't. So be aware of individual differences there, and then just be respectful about how you approach it. So, I was using that in a quick moment. Some
Yeah.
people would perhaps, but in other moments, you want to address the issue in the appropriate setting.
Hmm.
So maybe in the game it is the appropriate setting on the bench. Maybe other times it's not. The golden rule is try to close the gap between the events and when the feedback is delivered. The longer it's delayed, the less the connection they'll make in their brain. But sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it means after the game. Sometimes that means the next practice. Um, but one of the best approaches is, with adults is to break bread. I said,
Mm.
go have a meal and discuss this.
Yeah.
And it just seems more human. And I think that's where a lot of this goes wrong is people forget the human part of it.
Yeah.
And then we just get down to our particular view. And our view is always biased because we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we perceive it. And there's always bias.
Yeah. And as coaches, what should we be looking for uh, in this kind of potentially escalating conflicts on a team?
Mhm. Yeah, I would
What
say
are the
one.
signs? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, as a coach, you have to up your radar on recognizing emotions. So, get the pulse, the emotional pulse of your players.
And how do
And
you do that? Like, what does that mean?
you see them in practice. Some people
Mm,
might have a short fuse, other people doesn't phase them at all, and then
mm,
some people in between. So
yeah.
know what those triggers are for some of your athletes, and then maybe you sub out more quickly if you kind of notice what's going on. So scrimmage and practice or drills, it's a great time to see how people handle pressure, how they
Yeah.
handle conflict. And then that's where I like to interject quick stress reliefs. So what can I do as a coach to, the simple technique is when someone catches their breath and goes through their motion on the free throw line, right? That's a stress
Hmm.
relief tactic. So are there other things I can do? Your example of the red dot or next
Hmm.
play is another great example. So recognizing the emotions, recognizing the temperature in the room, so to speak, and when to use that as a coach. And then
Yeah.
eventually you build a culture, as you pointed out with your team, your players can actually do it as well. And that's a great example of leadership.
And there's this situation I see always play out, and I'm a lot of times I'm speaking to experience, where the players on the court as a team are just not performing where where they're expected to perform or where they have in the past, right? And they're falling below that line, so to speak. And they're then you know the coach eventually gets angry, let's just call that, right? And now you have this conflict between the coach and the players in a game situation. And maybe there's different stages or age groups you would handle this differently. One, I'm assuming at the younger, that's like, okay, you shouldn't be coaching, or just,
Right.
it's going to happen. It's to be expected. Older kids, maybe there's a different way, or it's going to happen probably a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, so and then maybe what we how should we handle that situation? What should we start recognizing inside of us? What is the self-talk as this is kind of building up on the sidelines, right? We're talking in game now, right? Where it's quick, the action is fast. You have your couple timeouts, 30 seconds, a minute sometimes, right? You got to get your message across.
Yeah. So I like the old stick shift analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have to downshift, other times we have to upshift. So
Mm-hmm.
as a coach, it's on us to one, always be calm ourselves, not always possible, but if we're not, quickly get ourselves to that optimal level. And then what happens is then we have more space to think strategically as a coach, as opposed to the go-to, throwing chairs across the court, right? The famous example. But I'm always impressed by coaches that keep their calm. I'm
Mm.
just in awe of them because one, the psychologist in me is saying, all right, I know they're fired up inside, but they're showing calm.
Yeah.
And then what that does is it gives them the space to be a better strategist and tactician in the moment, as
Mm.
opposed to the coach who's always flying off the handle.
Hmm.
So how do we regulate our emotions? And then if we're in a space, we're able to upshift or downshift. I like to look at it as our emotions on a scale from 0 to 10. Ideally, we want this optimal level to be a 5 in the midpoint, but sometimes we have to downshift if we're getting too heated up. Sometimes we have to upshift. And that's the beauty of sport. And I think that's why a lot of teams win because they know how to upshift and downshift
Yeah.
internally and as themselves by the coach.
Definitely one thing I, over 20 years of coaching, have noticed, and it's not going to be any surprise, which is when I'm heated, they play worse. Like when they see me just, I'm a little angsty or whatever, right? They just perform worse. I mean, now maybe that's again, maybe that's my perception through my goggles because, as I'm looking at them and I'm feeling, right? But I've had a few times in my as I'm getting older, and I would say in the last 10 years, those times where I just, like I just it's up there, right? At an 8 or a 9, right? And it's gonna approach a 10 real soon. Um, I'm very fortunate that it doesn't happen very often because I put it in perspective, but also the fact that, I always apologize because I always feel bad afterwards. Like, ugh, I
Yeah.
lost my temper, I lost my cool, right? And a lot of times from the players, the feedback I get is, no, coach, we deserved it. You were right. I mean, the effort we put out just, it wasn't there today. Um, and because they always end up saying, if you use it, why? If you use it, like you said, if you're not always at a 10 or a 9, and when you are at a 9 or 10, it gets their attention. And right. Um, and I think it can be used as a tool somewhat, as long as obviously it's not demeaning and
Right.
right.
You
So
don't want it to be your go-to tool because the immediate
yeah,
impact is the players may feel demoralized. They already know that they're
yeah.
probably not doing as well, and they might be confused by the coach's behavior. It might actually have a lower impact on performance because it's a distraction and puts us more in this negative energy.
Hmm.
So when we're in that space, we're less likely to perhaps look for that second pass or rotate over because, oh, coach has said this. So we're losing mental focus. So there
Yeah.
are some immediate performance impacts. And then the longer term effects of coaches who might lose their cool is, trust is diminished
Mm.
uh, among the players. Team cohesion may suffer. The players might become disengaged. And the coach's reputation might suffer over time as well. And then there's some secondary consequences, second order consequences where um, you might see the performance go down over time. It could lead to conflicts within the team because then finger pointing occurs. If the
Mm.
coach is pointing fingers, then the players are going to start pointing fingers at each other. Um, and then it just kind of diminishes over time. So it can be a useful tool for a quick upshift,
Yeah.
but back off because you don't want to, you're going to be revving that engine and you're going to be grinding gears and all that stuff over time. So losing your cool as a coach, I think, has far-reaching implications beyond just the moment in which that coach loses it.
Yeah. No, that's good. Anything else you want to add or any other questions I didn't ask you on that? I know this is yeah, it's a subject that in the sports world, and even in youth sports, it's a tool that we all need to learn as a coach, as a human being. And I found this to be really helpful. But maybe what you could do just to recap it, right?
Yeah.
Recap, like, how do we deal with, or what's the answer to conflict resolution? And if, just give us some 3 or 4 points to end on.
Absolutely. So as a coach, I would train quick stress relief tactics. So how can athletes and yourself kind of
Mhm.
regulate down? Next, have everybody recognize emotions and provide constructive, positive feedback. And then I guess third, know that everyone's different. It's not a one size all approach as a coach.
Mhm.
So you might have to adjust your expectations and enhance your toolkit. And then, the old verbiage, focus on the process, not necessarily the result, I think puts things in perspective. Uh, um, and if I've worked with some hot-headed coaches, and sometimes I'll sit down with them before a game, and just reminisce. Tell me about a story from your glory days.
Mhm.
And we're kind of one of my tactic there is I'm trying to set the stage to influence them to, you know, frame things more positively as opposed to going in negatively when they're probably amped up and anxious, just like the athletes are.
Yeah, no, yeah, I was just thinking one thing I've used in the past too was in situations where it's getting a little, could potentially get heated, right, and boil over. I ask a completely crazy question. I always say, "Well, what's your favorite superhero?"
Yeah,
Right? And then they just like look at me and they just kind of chuckle, and then I'm like, and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, what's your favorite superhero?"
yeah,
And you'll tell me what it is,
yeah,
right, and it just kind
exactly.
of just, yeah, just diffuses the situation. So
Think
um
they're, yeah.
yeah, David, this is great. If anyone wants to find out more, where can they find you one more time?
Yeah, at Successence, so it's success, ENCE, the essence of success, successence.net. You can find me there.
Awesome, David. Thank you once again for your time. We really appreciate it, and maybe we can have you back for a record 6 time.
All
Let's
right.
keep the streak let's keep the streak alive, huh?
My pleasure.
All right, till next time, coaches.
Hey, coach, so glad you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed it a lot. Actually, if you did, subscribe and like, and then go over and check out teachhoops.com for coaches who want to get better.